Hello and welcome to another episode of 177 Nations of Tasmania. Scots have been migrating to Tasmania virtually since its foundation as a British colony more than 200 years ago, and their mark and influence can be seen all over the place. But what about in more recent years? Do Scotland and Tasmania have the same ties as in the past? The Scottish migrant community in Tasmania is certainly on the old side, but Scots haven't stopped coming here, though the reasons for coming are perhaps different now to what they were in the past. My guest for this episode is Ross, and when he left school he had a passion for aquaculture, a field which would prove instrumental in him first finding a job and then forging a career in fish farming in Tasmania, and then being able to ride the wave of the flourishing salmon farming industry in the last 20 years. Indeed, it's something both Scotland and Tasmania are famous for. Although now 20 years in Tasmania, Ross still retains ties with his homeland. Amongst other things, you will also learn about the Scottish take on the French croissant.
So I grew up in Ayrshire, so a town called Irvine, which is kind of the west central part of Scotland, maybe 40 minutes from Glasgow, near the coast. Yeah, so I went to primary school there. Yeah, which was quite nice. It was quite a country kind of feel to it, and lots of little rivers and forests and stuff you can go and hide out on. And looking back, it was quite a fortunate place. Quite lucky to grow up there, to be honest. Yeah.
So is Irvine, like, what kind of town is it? Like, what are the sort of industries? What do people live from there?
When I was growing up there, it was one of, I don't know, maybe there was a few towns called new towns, which got given their own special corporation to develop the town in Scotland, and that meant they got a little bit more money to grow and do things. So I think there was a paper mill there. Probably employed a lot of people from the power stations up the coast. So there was a couple of power stations not far away. We had the development corporation, and they built and did all sorts of things. We had the biggest indoor sports centre in Scotland built at the time, called the Magnum Centre, which was massive. It had ice rinks and squash courts and massive swimming pool. It was the first flumes, water slides in Scotland there as well, down by the waterfront, which actually got knocked down a couple of years ago, so that was a bit disappointing. It reached the end of its life, I think. And there was, probably back in the day, there was fishing. There was the old fishing port there and a bit of farming. It was quite a biggish town, so I can't remember how many people, but there was a good mix of everything there. You know, you had your standard, your council house area, and because it was a new town, there was lots of new housing developments going on, and it was expanding a little bit like Kingston is at the minute. So kind of a developing town, and yeah, you know, just a mix of everything really. Yeah, I wouldn't say it was a wealthy town by any stretch of the imagination, but just kind of your average Scottish town. Yeah. So my dad's English, my mum's Scottish. Her side of the family were all from Fife and Kirkcaldy and that area, and my dad is from Liverpool, and they met in the Air Force. I think they lived in England for quite a few, well, I know they did live in England for quite a few years down in Wigan. My older brother there, although he was born in Scotland, and I actually was born in England, but then we moved immediately to Scotland about a month later. So there was no family, and it was quite, you're going back, 30 odd, 40 years, like getting from Irvine to the east coast of Scotland wasn't an easy task back then. Mm-hmm. There's a lot more direct roads and highways and motorways these days, but by all accounts it was a bit of a trek in the old Ford Cortina or whatever it was, or the Allegro or the Lada that people were driving at the time, especially in the winter when some of the roads were, because it was on the coast, you had to kind of go up over, I guess, a moorland area to get towards Glasgow, so that was a bit treacherous in the winter. You know, it would be quite often blocked off with snow, and yeah. After that, we moved to north of Glasgow and went to high school there, and then moved out of home to go to uni. So went to Stirling for 5 years. Yeah, and the amount of houses and share flats you live in over that period of time is just quite scary, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you went to primary school in Ayrshire?
Yeah, and then Again, probably because of family work circumstances, we moved, probably the equivalent of year 5 or 6.
Okay.
So just finishing off primary school, moved to the north of Glasgow, which when you say Glasgow, it certainly wasn't the city part of Glasgow. It was maybe half an hour north in a place called Lennoxtown, which is in Dumbartonshire, but it's a small old mining village really. Like there's quite a different setup to Irvine, so quite small, and you had some of the larger satellite towns from Glasgow like Kirkintilloch and Bishopbriggs, which were bigger. But yeah, there wasn't a lot going on really for people. There was a lack of jobs as well, so it was a beautiful place to live because it literally was surrounded by farmland, and then we had the Campsie Hills basically backing on to the end of our street, which is the start of the Highlands. So you could literally walk 50 metres and through into the farmers' paddocks, and then you could go up and find old Roman forts and all these kind of weird and wonderful things going on the hill, and even sometimes just walk up the hill when you were kids because you had nothing else to do. So it was quite lucky, and we didn't have snakes or things that can kill you here, so you never ever worried about that.
Yeah.
You just went for the walk.
What are sort of your strongest memories of going to high school there?
So the school's since been knocked down. So that's, it was quite an old school, like massive staircases, big wooden banisters, and these huge high ceiling classrooms in parts of it. So it was quite an old school. There was always kind of artifacts from decades gone by when, you'd hear stories about corporal punishment and people getting beat up by the teachers, and the straps. The straps were still there. Like it was never there when I was there, but I know my brother told me stories of when he was at school and him getting a strap. And but it was a fun time. It was just growing up when you were a kid. Like it was pretty. There was a lot of kind of camaraderie and a lot of fun. There was a lot of kind of emotional stuff to deal with as you're growing up, and I see that with my kids now. Like they're going through school, and you forget how tough it can be sometimes. You're lumped in with all these kids, and the slightest little thing they can pick up, and that's you berated for the rest of the school term.
Yeah.
I guess one thing I realised when I came here, the more you socialise with people and you talk about your upbringing, the more you realise that it was quite a hard school. There was a lot of hard areas. So there was a lot of people, a lot of fights and things. You just, you had to be quite tough-skinned, quite upright in terms of how you dealt with things. I found,
Was the school in the same area where you lived?
Yeah, it was close. It was so that our town was only big enough for a couple of primary schools, and they always get in Scotland. They get split into Catholic and Protestant still because there's that divide. So if you're Catholic, you go to the Catholic school, and if you're Protestant, you go to the Protestant school, and that's it. No argument. And then I think it was in Kirkintilloch and Bishopbriggs and a couple of other places had high schools, so we used to get the bus into Kirkintilloch to the St Ninians, it was called.
Because you mentioned that divide between Protestant and Catholic, and I know that Glasgow is one of the really most cities where that's a really marked feature.
Yeah, Edinburgh to some degree, but really Glasgow's just, it's almost like a mini Ireland in that sense, So there was lots of pro-IRA kind of songs getting sung on the school buses. There was anti-loyalist songs and, all that kind of stuff. And that was just part of, they would get sung on the school buses. So it was like, and you didn't even know half of what it was meant, but you were just singing it because you were Catholic and you grew up and you were supporting Celtic, and that's what you sung at the football games when you went to the football, and and it's changing a lot now, but you can't change overnight something that's hundreds of years in the making, can you?
Yeah, and I guess it's a very deeply tribal thing.
Yeah, totally.
Where you're part of a group, and so you're expected to behave in this certain way and do all these things.
Yeah. The same with, we were talking about like some of the Eastern European stuff, and, Serbia and Croatia, that's, the same way that they've got that rivalry, for different reasons, but it's kind of ingrained and it's not going away anytime soon. But yeah, it was one of the reasons I was quite happy to leave, because it just caused too many issues.
Yeah.
You know, there was too many times I found myself walking down the street in Glasgow, and you just get accosted by a couple of people. You know, you Celtic or Rangers, are you Catholic or Protestant? And it's like, toss a coin, am I going to get in a fight or not? Like, what do you do? Sometimes people just look for a fight, but there's other things to worry about in life rather than that kind of stuff, to be honest. Like, really?
I guess that you get more perspective when you leave as well.
Yeah, you do, but I think perspective's there. I think, yeah, it's just quite, like you say, it's quite short-sighted. I get why it happens, and I get the history and all that kind of stuff, but at some point you just got to look forward a little bit, and it was something I wasn't fussed about leaving behind, really. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So at the time, like when you were young, were you sort of conscious that was all a bit strange or whatever, or was that something you kind of realised later?
No, I think even growing up, yeah. Mm-hmm. Like I did go to, like I was never a super massive fan of like one of the football teams. Like I was having a dad that was from Liverpool. I kind of grew up supporting Liverpool more, ironically, mm-hmm. and maybe because we went to primary school in Ayrshire, a little bit removed from Glasgow, so it was then going to Glasgow and then what's all this Celtic Rangers Catholic Protestant thing all about. It was quite different, quite noticeable. And yeah, the area that we lived was definitely divided. Like I said, the schools are divided, and everything's pubs. You get Celtic pubs and Catholic pubs and Protestant pubs. So yeah, I'm definitely aware of it at a young age, and so when you start growing up and becoming a young adult, you're thinking, is this something I want to have to deal with, or
yeah, it's reminded me actually of being in Scotland that some pubs they also have signs, don't they, that not showing
no football colours.
Yeah,
it's quite common.
When you were at sort of school age, like high school age, like did you have any sort of idea of what you might do in the future once you left school?
Yeah, so I think maybe in about grade 9 or 10. I don't know if you have it here, but you have work experience where you take a week or two and go work somewhere, and they're usually doled out to you, so you get the choice of the local newspaper or the radio station or the petrol station or engineers or whatever it is. And I'd been into trout fishing for quite a while, and I decided I wouldn't mind going and working on one of these. It was actually a trout farm, fishery, and a deer farm as well. I wouldn't mind going and trying that out, and it wasn't, it was a little bit out the way, but it wasn't ridiculous, so I went and did that. And I think from there on I was pretty focused that I wanted to work in aquaculture. Well, it was just fish farming at the time. There wasn't, it was called aquaculture, but salmon and trout farming was still pretty young in Scotland, and you had to go and work in the middle of nowhere out in the west coast and north and the Highlands. So yeah, that's kind of what I started to focus on, really, and what I needed. You go and speak to your guidance teacher after a few years, and she didn't have a clue, so she was like, sorry, I can't help you, you're just going to have to do this one on your own. But there was only so many places, so it was, my first choice of uni was to go to England, actually, to go to Liverpool, because I wanted to get a season ticket with my student loans and go and watch Liverpool every week. That was the sole decision, and that was freshwater biology or freshwater ecology, I think, I can't remember. And then the second choice was actually to do aquaculture at Stirling, because at Stirling Uni they had, one of the biggest aquaculture departments. Well, definitely the biggest in the UK. So that was only half an hour up the road. So anyway, I wasn't keen to hang around at school any longer than I needed to. So, and Stirling was just half an hour up the road, so I could move out of the home. I could go into this halls of residence, and I was close enough that I could jump on the train and be back home in 40 minutes as well, which was kind of handy. Decided that's what I'd do, and got the grades, scraped them to get in.
And was there a clear career path in aquaculture at the time?
No, there was. I think what attracted me was the fact that it was something I could travel and do just about anywhere, and it was outdoors. So as part of the degree, we got a travel grant, so we could go away for half the year. And people, someone actually came to Tasmania the year before me and worked at the Seahorse Centre. Yeah, and I read her dissertation. It was quite good. And someone went to the Solomon Islands. People went to America, to Europe. I went to Thailand. People, really went all over, and you get that with everything these days. I think people traveling for work's just, you can do anything. But I think at the time it was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. So yeah, and then I think I'd been kind of interested in Australia before then, but hadn't really taken much notice. And when I was at uni, I had a girlfriend who was kind of half Scottish. Well, she wasn't. She was kind of half Scottish, half Australian.
Okay.
Like our family lived between the two places. So a couple of times, during that long summer break in the UK, we'd come out here, and we came out here and did a bit of travelling up the East Coast, and I was pretty set that, no matter what happens, I'd come out and do the work and holiday visa, and had visions of working up in Queensland in my shorts and t-shirts and wrangling crocodiles and massive tuna down in Port Lincoln and all sorts of things. So when I finished, after working for a year, after maybe about one winter, I think, working outdoors again in Scotland, I was like, nah, this is not happening. So I just knuckled down and did what every other kind of 20-year-old does, and works and saved every penny until they've paid their flight and got like a couple of grand. Enough to see them through a few weeks, and came out with some friends and did a little bit of travelling, and then partied a little bit too much and ran out of money pretty quickly, or way quicker than I thought I was going to do, which was quite a worry at the time, because you're staring down the barrel of like, how, as a backpacker, how are you we really are going to have to go and pick fruit in the middle of nowhere at this rate. This is, and there wasn't a lot of jobs kicking around back then either. It was pretty 2001 wasn't maybe the easiest, but anyway, I thought I'd get a job down here in Tassie, and sure enough, after just pinging people on the phone and emailing people at the time, and someone offered me a job like for 3 months as part of the visa, and that was really, it was a godsend, because again, I just worked for 3 months and lived in a caravan and saved money, and
And what was the job?
It was just hatchery, working on a salmon hatchery. It was actually up at Mountfield National Park, just on the edge there. So it was an old family-owned company, one of the first kind of trout farms back in the day. But it was, it's beautiful up in Mountfield, so when I wasn't working, I was walking around Russell Falls and all the tracks up there. It was, pretty amazing. It was a good time of year as well. So it was kind of, I arrived, I think, in March. So I had March, April, May. So,
just before the turning of the Vegas and all that.
Yeah. And it definitely, it was definitely warm, like hot in March as well, but not full on winter time. For living in the caravan anyway, that was, and that all worked out. It was I really enjoyed it, and they asked me to stay on, so I had a trip to the mainland with some friends, and had that kind of moment where I was in Sydney with some really old friends from uni, having more than a few beers and getting up and just sitting there thinking, and they went off travelling, and it was more of one of those moments where that I can keep going travelling, or I can get in the car that's already packed and come back to Tassie. And because part of the deal was they'd sponsor me to get my residency, as like it was a regional sponsored, and that was something that was on my tick list that I needed. If you want to stay here, you need that, so you have to make that decision, I think. So it was quite a big decision. I was just like, I need to go. Got in the car and toddled off back here, and haven't looked back since, really.
So at the time, were there any alternatives that you could have gone to if you hadn't come to Tasmania? Hadn't stayed in Tasmania?
Yeah, well, I was in Adelaide first, so I was trying to get a job with the tuna farms, and I think there was something else out there, but things were pretty dire. Like we couldn't find anything in Adelaide. Like there was 2 or 3 of us, and we all really struggled, even to get bar work. So it was a bit of a struggle, but there's always options. It's just about timing, isn't it?
Yeah.
For these things, but there was prawns and barramundi, but they were all quite really in their infancy. Whereas back in 2001, you had the kind of aquaculture industry here was just about. They had some consolidation where all the companies basically went bust. Basically, so Tassal went into receivership and bought 2 other companies who were also going to go into receivership, and anyone that didn't came really close. So it was a tough time. To begin with, it was all right, but then it was quite tough for quite a few years. You know, you didn't have a lot of money to spend, but I think that's what consolidated that whole industry and allowed it to grow, really. Yeah. Yeah. So there wasn't, I did look at doing other things with other companies during that time, but I was quite focused on, I enjoyed where I worked and seeing out that time to get my citizenship, really. Yeah. And then once you've got your citizenship, you're a little bit more free.
Was it a relatively easy thing settling into life on a more permanent basis in Tasmania? Or were there a few challenges or things you had to adapt to, perhaps?
So I settled in really well, I'll be honest. Like I really liked living here. I liked the pace of Hobart. You know, I was 23 when I came here. So, you know, and people used to say there wasn't a lot of stuff here for young people, but I guess life's what you make of it, isn't it?
Yeah,
so certainly didn't have any issues. You know, it was quite a fun place to hang out. Yeah, it wasn't Sydney or any of these places, but, you know, there was plenty of places to go out and have a drink compared to, and some nice little pubs and places to hang out. And you're at the foot of Mount Wellington, so tons of stuff to do in terms of walking and going down the beach and scuba diving or surfing or riding a bike or playing golf or whatever it is you want, really. Yeah. And the climate was, you know, leaving Scotland, again, one of the other things, you wanted to get away from the cold and the damp and the wet. And everyone says, well, why do you come here? But
It's not comparable to Scotland,
oh,
I have to
no,
say.
it's like, I seen an ad when I was back in Scotland once. We've seen an ad that the Royal Hobart was doing to try and get staff, and it was in the Glasgow, one of the Glasgow newspapers, and they described it as "come work in a tropical paradise." And I was like, check this out! Like they're trying to get, and it is, you know, for people in Scotland.
When you first settled here, you got sponsored. Were you sort of expecting to stay here for the 20 years like you did?
Don't know. Don't know what. Like I'd really just focused on, you know, get my citizenship, and then I can see what happens, and you know, you never know what's going to happen. And in between that time, I'd met my now ex-wife. So when I got my citizenship, and she was from Tasmania, but she had Scottish family, we decided that we'd take a year and go traveling, or go to Europe at least, and we went visited my parents and worked. We both got jobs and started working in Scotland and just hung out there for a little while. And I kind of gave up fish farming a little bit because I was decided maybe it's not for me. But 6 months later, I got a job in Belgium, so we moved to Belgium for this fish farming job, which wasn't what it turned out to be, just because of the language difficulties, and it was too far ahead of its time. But it was such an interesting thing to do, really, to go out and work in the middle of Belgium for 5 or 6 months. And then we're like, well, what should we do now? When that kind of was obvious it came to an end, and we thought about going back to Aberdeen because that's where we both worked, and we could get our jobs likely we could have got the jobs back we had. But we looked at buying a flat, and I remember at the time Aberdeen was it was like a bit like Perth, you know, during the mining boom. It really took off when oil prices went back up, and everyone made their headquarters there. So getting a flat, you know, you'd go in, it was like Hobart the last 2 years, trying to buy a house, you'd go in with 20 others. Yeah. And it was just, they'd go offers over 200 grand and it'd go for 360.
Wow.
So it was just insane. And we got caught up in that. And we started to get closer and closer because we were trying to buy a flat at the time, and we had a house here. And eventually it got to that stage where we were like, well, you know, for the kind of money that we're offering on a 2-bedroomed flat in Aberdeen with no garden and no nothing else and a bit ground floor or whatever, we could, you know, just buy something nicer in Hobart, because back then Hobart prices were still pretty cheap. Well, they're not cheap now, but certainly back then they were.
Yeah.
So, and we thought we'd be able to get jobs back here, which we did in the end. Sometimes it's a little bit tricky when you come back to Hobart after being away to get back into it. But we just came back and bought another house, sold our one, bought another one, and then within 2 months, it was like we never left. It's like, ah. But yeah, I don't know about whether I ever thought I'd stay here long term. I knew it was a possibility, because especially when you meet someone and you have kids, and that was, it's a great place to have kids. But then we got 2 kids. We went to New South Wales for a year, like south of Sydney. And I could have seen myself living there permanently. Just the climate and that kind of beach way of life was really attractive. And it wasn't too hot. Certainly seeing the kids grow up there, and like, man, you hardly ever needed to wash any clothes because they were just running around in shorts all the time.
Yeah.
Whereas here, like, it's, trousers and T-shirts and jumpers and jackets and... But I've been back to Scotland a few times the last year, and I'd always said was never interested in moving back, or there was nothing I'd move back for, really. Whereas having been back a few times, I'm definitely, when the kids grow up, I certainly wouldn't rule it out. At least doing it for a couple of years, if that's, why not?
And have you been back to the sort of places where you grew up?
Yeah. We specifically went to quite a few places, which was quite intriguing. They didn't look they definitely were the same place, and they looked the same, but maybe your memories, it's always bright sunshine, like your happy memories, and this, it was warm, whereas it was like September, I think, when we did a few of those things, so it was a bit cold, and then December it was a bit colder. But yeah, you do these things and just to kind of jog a memory, and it's really, really intriguing when you've not been somewhere, I think, because different things jog different memories. And like, I found the smell of things really jogged memories. You can see something on paper, or maybe it was a combination of all your senses, and it's all kind of triggering a little bit, yeah. But like, whether it was the smell of certain pine trees mixed with, the water, or things that maybe you haven't smelt for a long time, it was really quite intriguing, yeah. And I didn't go chapping on people's doors or looking for old friends or anything, but I definitely caught up with a few people, and I took my kids to this pond that my granddad used to take me to. So it would have been comfortably 40 years ago. He used to take us like fishing with little nets and stuff. And I was looking at it going, I wouldn't let my kids walk around in there barefooted. But I guess 40 years of run off into this little pond makes a difference. But it was quite interesting how it's good. I think it's good to do that sort of stuff, because it really, you remind yourself really that not just memories, there were real things that really did happen, and if that makes sense. And I'd like to do more of it. It was all kind of done in a bit of a rush. I'd like to, maybe that's why I'd like to go back, because it'd give you a bit more time to go for a walk up the hill behind where I used to live and spend a day doing it, rather than just stop in for 10 minutes and look at something. See if you can find some maybe, like, I'm sure there's a couple of trees I carved my initials into somewhere. See if you could find them, show the kids, or a bit of concrete, maybe put my initials in somewhere.
Yeah. So how old are your kids now?
They're 11 and 9. So I've got a girl who's 11 and boy who's 9, yeah. So it's not going to be long, another 6 or 7 years, and they'll both be grown up and hopefully left home. But they might travel as well. Like, I think my eldest, she's quite interested in Scotland. She likes the fact that she's got extended family there. So she's got grandparents here, but I guess there's not an extended family, and she's quite aware that like, her friends have got cousins and uncles and all that kind of, like, if you're here for generations, you've got that kind of history. And when we went back, you could just see how she was when the family were around. Her eyes lit up. She was part of a bigger family, and she just, I think maybe women like that more, don't they? Like, it was a social aspect. Even just getting ready for something, they were all getting their clothes on and putting makeup on, and she was in the middle of it. It was just like, wow. Like, I'm really, I've got a family here, and she knows now that, like, my cousins there, I've got some cousins who've got young kids the same age, and so there's other reasons we could go back. I think there's a good education system in Scotland. It used to be if you lived there for a year, you got access to it. I think they've changed it now because every man and his dog was going back.
And I was wondering whether you were one of those people who craved haggis or occasionally gets the kilt out.
I definitely like a bit of black pudding now and again.
Okay.
Yeah, like I'll regularly buy black pudding, and I've even made potato scones. I've made a Scottish fry up for a friend a couple of times. You know, there's something called an Aberdeenshire buttery. It's called a buttery in Aberdeen, and it's like a Scottish croissant. So except it's not light and fluffy, it's more flat and square. But it's essentially a Scottish croissant because it's just flour, water, lard, and butter and salt, and you fold it, keep layering it and folding it. So in the same way as you do a kind of croissant, but instead of twirling it, you just leave it folded. And it was, I guess something that they used to give to the fishermen because it would last ages and high in energy.
Okay.
But my God, these are so delicious. I stick them in the toaster. So made a few of those, keep a few of those going. But I haven't, I've never had a kilt until quite recently. Yeah, I've been pretty lax at keeping some Scottish traditions going. Yeah. I used to be pretty big on like things like Burns Night. So the first few years, even, for a few years, we'd go to some of these Burns Nights and take people along, but just got out of the habit of it, really. And I find some of the Scottish societies really, as a youngster, in your 20s, it was, hopefully it's changed maybe, but certainly at the time it was quite depressing. It wasn't what you expected. You wanted a big ceilidh and a big party and usually a bit of a piss up and everyone having a good time. The kids got to see a ceilidh when they were back in Scotland and they were like, oh my God. And I went to a wedding in Scotland and took pictures and they couldn't actually believe that everybody did wear kilts. They were like, we thought you were only kidding. I was like, no, like when you go to a wedding in Scotland, everybody wears kilts, like literally everybody. So they thought that was mind-blowing, really, yeah.
I should probably just get you to explain what a ceilidh is, which obviously I know, but I think a lot of people who might be listening might not know what the Scottish tradition is.
What a ceilidh is. I don't know what the word stands for, but it's basically like a Scottish barn dance where you have all well-known choreographed dances to certain songs. So, for example, Strip the Willow, and it has certain actions and moves, and usually it involves men dancing with the ladies in a certain order, and you can change partners while you're doing it. And there's lots of prancing around and arm holding, twirling around, and it's usually at the point where you're quite inebriated. So, and you quite often have an MC. So these things, you can have ceilidhs on their own. So quite often at any party, you can just have a ceilidh. But quite often for weddings, you'd have the ceilidh would be the dance part of the wedding, and Hogmanay at New Year's, you'd have it. And they have modernised it a little bit. I noticed that they've kind of tried to modernise the ceilidhs to make it a little bit more upbeat and faster.
Okay.
And some of the dances get faster as you go along. And so there'll be an MC or a person leading the whole thing. So yeah, it's quite good. Definitely good fun.
Is there anything that you particularly miss from Scotland here?
Probably family. Yeah, I hadn't really, like I said, I wasn't really that fussed, but I think as you grow up and get a bit older and you realise how fragile families are and they can just disappear pretty quickly. And also the fact that there isn't an extended family or a big extended family around for the kids. It's something I've definitely over the last few years realised that, you miss it without realising you're missing it, I guess, yeah.
And do your kids maintain contact with any of their relatives in Scotland?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So my dad regularly comes out here, or he did do before COVID, so he was out every year, and spend 3 or 4 weeks here. So they've got a great relationship with him. We regularly FaceTime him, and they send each other postcards from everywhere they go. So that's kind of like a nice little thing. So we've got a fridge covered with postcards, and yeah, they do have a good relationship with them, and like some good memories as well of him getting the wrong bus to Sandy Bay and them telling him they should have got off somewhere else, but he didn't. He insisted, and that's all you really want, isn't it? For kids to have these kind of memories of their grandparents, I guess. Yeah, I say I was lucky, but I don't know that they had summer schools or daycares and stuff as much when I was growing up. So we used to get packed off on the bus to the grandparents for the school holidays.
Yeah.
And so I've got great memories of hanging out with my grandparents.
Did your grandparents live nearby?
No, well, like I said, they were the other side of the country. Like, it wasn't that
okay.
far, but it'd be like, even from Glasgow, it was maybe 2 hours on a bus or something, I think. So we'd sit in this bus for 2 hours, but that's what you did, I guess, isn't it? It's like going to Launceston back
Yeah,
in the day.
yeah.
It's no real different if your parents lived up in Devonport or somewhere.